My name is John Lobell. I teach architecture at Pratt Institute. I blog at johnlobell.com, review movies from a mythological point of view at cinemadiscourse.com, and you can reach me at johnlobell at mac.com. This is a recording of a lecture done live in class on India and Buddhism for first-year architectural students. India. Let's refer back to one of our introductory lectures at the beginning of the course, and we defined architecture in a lot of different ways. So the one that I looked at, dealing with worldviews, architecture is the crystallization of a culture's worldview into form. And if you go back and look at that PDF from that lecture, I have quotes from Frank Lloyd Wright and Mies van der Rohe saying essentially that. So let's see how that happens in Indian architecture. So you might recall I put up this slide of different worldviews, and the world is material and scientific laws. So we might see that as the notion of modernism, Western modernism. But here was one. There's no creator, the world has always been and will not end. Consciousness is a fundamental part of the world. And so we're in a part of the world where that's more the point of view. And the fundamental existential entity is the society, not the individual. So let's see how, if we can see some of these ideas manifest in the architecture. So here's a very quick survey. Again, you can look at this slide, but so in Greece, we have a focus on the individual, but subject to fate. In the West, the individual seeking to conquer their fate and an inner moral compass in each person. In the Middle East, in the Mesopotamian biblical traditions, putting oneself in accord with the mandates of the Creator. In China, that we'll look at shortly, a focus on being in harmony with the flow of nature. And in India, which we're looking at now, an identity with the infinite. And we'll see that in Hinduism and Buddhism. Now, I like to say that a high culture begins by laying down its temple form and its epic poem. So for the Greeks, it would be the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Greek temple. For the West, it would be the Romanesque and Gothic cathedrals and the Arthurian romances. The epic poem of India is the Mahabharata. It is 10 times as long as the Iliad and Odyssey put together. It's a real monster. In a way, we might say that for Greece, it's the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then the Greek tragedies are sort of psychological commentary on the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Mahabharata contains all of that in one epic poem. A key book of it is the Bhagavad Gita, in which Prince Arjuna is about to go into battle to regain his usurped throne, and his armies are lined up and his enemy's armies are lined up, and he drives his chariot up and down and says, I've got friends and mentors and teachers on both sides and relatives on both sides of this battle line. This battle should not happen. My throne is not that important. At which point, Vishnu is his charioteer, reveals his true self, rears up, is devouring these armies and says, who do you think you are? You're a warrior. It's your duty to go into battle. And then instructs Arjuna in the ephemeralness of this life and the permanence of a transcendent life and the notions of reincarnation. So, geographically, India, we refer to it as a subcontinent, very protected by the Himalayas, mountain ranges, deserts, cut off, not totally, but essentially cut off from the rest of Eurasia, and having very poor seaports, despite an extensive coast. So it developed in somewhat isolation. Now, this is one of the slides that we're not going to pause to read the whole thing. We'll zip through the history of India here. We begin with Paleolithic and then Neolithic history, and very similar to what we looked at before. We'll find the dolmens and other spiral pottery, other similarities with other Paleolithic and then Neolithic cultures. There's the Indus Valley civilization, which we're only going to look at on one slide, but it's in effect a parallel to Mesopotamia and Egypt. And so it's an early high civilization. There's then the Vedic period where these Indo-Aryan or Indo-European invasions come in, and what we see as India classically and in Hinduism, it's a mixture of the indigenous Dravidian culture and these invading Indo-Europeans. We'll look at that again in a minute. 5th century BCE, you have the introduction of Buddhism. Between 200 BC and 280, it's a 400-year period. There are extensive trade with Rome. So these civilizations are in touch with each other. You go down the street in Rome in 200-300 AD, you'll find a Buddhist temple. These places were very cosmopolitan and aware of each other. In the 200s BCE, the leading emperor was Ashoka, who conquered much of what we think of today as India, and was so horrified later in life at the brutality of the battles that he fought that he converted to Buddhism and built many Buddhist stupas, that we'll see shortly, and Buddhist teaching centers, monasteries, etc. In the 16th century, we get Islamic invasions, and, well, from the 10th century on, but in the 16th century, the establishment of a Mughal empire. Their most famous building is the Taj Mahal. We won't look at that here. We'll look at it when we look at Islam. Starting in the 1700s, as colonialization, European trading companies established themselves. And in the 19th century, the British government took over from the East India. A private company was running India. And so the British government said, this just isn't right, and took over, and India became part of the British Empire until 1947, when India gained independence. So here's this Indus Valley civilization in one slide. It's a late Neolithic and then early high civilization, and there are several prominent works of art. You'll find a whole discussion of this dancing girl in our Stockstad textbook. If we look at the ruins, they're rather formal, and we see there indications of a quite developed civilization. Now, the India we want to talk about today, as I said, is a function of a coming together of the earlier Neolithic, dark-skinned Dravidian population being invaded by these Indo-European invaders. So you recall from our discussion of the Neolithic that the Neolithic cultures get invaded by these, sometimes called racially Indo-Aryans and linguistically Indo-Europeans. So the language all across from Sanskrit to Latin are all Indo-European languages. So Sanskrit, which is the scholarly language of India, is in the same family as Latin. And these people come out of the steppes of Russia. They have advanced weapons. They have horse-drawn chariots. They're great warriors. They're nomadic people. And they have a pantheon of gods that includes Zeus, we're familiar with, becomes Roman for when becomes Jupiter in Rome, Thor up here in Scandinavia, and Indra in India. So Indra is a lightning, thunder-wielding sky god parallel to Zeus. So around 1500 BC, we have these invasions. They have these war carts, and Hinduism is a combination. Hinduism is the native religion of India, is a result of a combination of these two cultures, and this is the beginning of the caste system, which is very strong in India, illegal today, but still practiced socially, in which you are locked into your caste. You're born into it. It tells you what your duties and occupations will be in life. There's no intermarriage between castes, and there's a color differentiation with the lighter people, descendants of these Aryan invaders, being of the higher caste, and the darker people of the native Dravidians being of the lower castes. So, Hinduism. It's very difficult to describe Hinduism because it's a collection of diverse traditions rather than a single religion. It's different in different periods, and in effect, Hinduism is the culture of traditional India. In other words, we do not have the separation of church and state. Hinduism is not something you do on the weekend and the rest of the time you're a civic person. Rather, it is integral with everything in the culture. Now, these invading Vedic peoples bring Brahmanism, which involves ritual, sacrifice, sacred texts, rules for the social order, soma, really cool stuff, magic mushrooms, and heroic gods, including parallels to Zeus and Thor. This gets imposed over so that goddess worshiping indigenous cultures to get this expanded pantheon with female goddesses. Same thing we see in Greece with the goddesses being earlier and of the native cultures, and then of the invading cultures bring the gods, and then they marry and make a pantheon. So key ideas in Hinduism include attachment to Mother India. A good Hindu cannot leave India because it is your spiritual sustenance. The land is fundamental to the whole idea. The caste system, this world is an illusion. The real world is transcendent, thus religions that involve meditation. And the notion of reincarnation, which depends on karma. The meaning of karma changes. Earlier, it means following the law, and later it means having good soul. So we'll have a word like karma can have different meanings in different times. All of this gets manifested in the Hindu temple. So the Hindu temple is a manifestation in form of the Hindu, which is the same thing as Indian, worldview. It's a three-dimensional mandala. We're going to introduce what a mandala is. And the purpose of a Hindu temple is to put one in harmony with the Hindu world. And that would be true of the temple form of any culture. But in its presence, you come into harmony, in part through the architecture, in part through the rituals that are performed there, with the world. There's individual worship. You don't gather the whole community in there the way you would in a nave of a Gothic cathedral. You go there as an individual, leave an offering. It's a cart or chariot of the spirit. We'll see that in a few minutes. A big model of that cart we saw earlier. It's a model of the Hindu caste system, and it's a model of the Hindu worldview as seen in yantras and mandalas, and it harmonizes space, sound, and energy. So this is our key example, Lingaraja in Brahmesvara, 11th century AD, and a lingam is the male phallus. So this is very deliberately phallic, and so this is the phallic tower and the womb cavern, and we'll see the two in dialogue in the culture. So we said that the temple's a three-dimensional mandala. What's a mandala? Well, this is a mandala. So a mandala is a diagram of concentric squares and circles. More specifically, it's the plan of a palace. So this is the walls of a palace with 4 gates. But then in its religious use, it's a model of the cosmos. It's a diagram of the universe, the moral universe. Cosmos is the physical universe plus consciousness. It's a model of the mind. And it's therefore a tool used in meditation in order to bring the mind into harmony with the cosmos. So you sit in front of a mandala, meditate on it, and they say, it will bring the workings of your mind into harmony with the cosmos. Now, in effect, this is a plan, two-dimensional plan of what is a real mandala is actually three-dimensional. So the Hindu temple is, in effect, a real mandala, which is three-dimensional. Tibetans and other Himalayan peoples are having a ball when they're in architecture school now, because they can build these elaborate computerized 3D models of their mandalas. This is a particularly famous mandala, fundamental to Hindu architecture, the Vastapurusha mandala. So Vastapurusha is a wild man, untamed energy. You'll find much of creation cosmology has to do with bringing order out of chaos, taming chaos. So here, the Vastapurusha is imprisoned into this 9-square grid, which then brings him into order. And the lower parts are the arms and legs which do the work, and so they're on the periphery. And the highest part, we would say, the mind or the heart. Well, in these traditions, it's in the belly, the Dantian in Tai Chi. So this is the heart or soul of the person, so that would be in the center. And these represent also lower castes in the periphery and higher castes in the center. And this diagram then becomes the basis for making a Hindu temple. Now, in building a Hindu temple, and I like doing this slide because we're going to hear about how the Etruscans, who are the progenitors of the Romans, would lay out their cities, and it's exactly the same process because it comes from these Aryans that move into both places. So you choose a day through auspices, etc. Put down the gnomon, which is the center. Draw a circle around it, watch sunset and sunrise. That gives you your east-west and therefore north-south axes. Stake it out, level the site, and then make offerings, and then plow and plant. Then you harvest the plants, you let animals come and eat them. For the sacred temple in the center, you do all this again, and then you lay out a mandala grid, and then build your city. Now, some of the famous temples are Khajuraho, and they're covered with erotic sculpture. And I'm showing some of the tamer ones here. And what is this all about? Why are they showing all of these, not just couples, but groups in copulation? And there's a notion about the generation of the universe. So this is another mandala, the Sri Yantra, which is a mandala. The Bindu is the point in the center, center of existence, and the upward triangles are phallic and male, and the downward triangles are the pubic triangle and female. And these two are in interrelationship. And so the notion is that, and we see this idea, same idea in Plato, existence begins as one. And therefore there's nothing going on because there's nothing to think about, because there's no other existence to think about. But this one splits, and once it splits, it becomes aware of itself, it becomes aware of duality. And so we then get these dualities that then have to come back into relationship, which is this process. So this is made an analogy to male and female. So male and female are in copulation and totally unaware of anything else, and they say, oh wow, somebody else here. And so they draw apart, become aware of opposites, find parallels to this in the story of Genesis, and then the female gives birth. And in giving birth, we get birth, creation of life, aging, sickness, and death. So old age, sickness, and death all come about from this process. And this then thrusts one into the cycle of life. And in certain kinds of Eastern traditions, the point is to get out of this cycle. Now, another idea we need to know about is the chakra system. And that is, their theory is that there's a series of energy centers, 7 of them, along the spine, representing at the lowest one pure energy, pure power, then at the genitals, sexual energy, then at the abdomen, political, social power, then at the heart, the possibility of spirituality, at the throat, religion, at the third eye, God with form, and at the top chakra, top of the head, God without form. And so there's a form of yoga called Kundalini Yoga in which one activates and integrates these parts of oneself. They're also parts of the universe. So here is a traditional Hindu woman. Every morning she takes flour and makes a mandala in front of her house. So today you got to get off to your job and there's not time for that kind of thing. But this is a traditional notion. During the day, insects and rodents come, eat the rice, and so that this integrates back into life. And so traditional Hinduism is seen very much a part of everyday life. Here, if you get onto a bus, the bus driver might have made a little dish out of banana leaves, water in it, and a flower floating in it that you see every time you get on the bus. And here, if you take sand, put it on the head of a drum, bong, a tuning fork, touch it to the drum, the sand will arrange itself in patterns like this. So these are patterns of sound, magnetic energy, other forms of vibration. And the Hindus feel that these are the patterns of the universe and that they are mandalas and therefore temples put one into harmony with those patterns and energies. So, Hinduism, what's our takeaway? This you have to write down. This is a quick reminder that'll lead you back to what we just saw. Hinduism is, in effect, the culture of India. It's not something separate from everything else. It's integrated into everyday life. There's an attachment to Mother India. Fundamental in this culture is the caste system. This world is an illusion. The real world is transcendent. And they have a notion that they reincarnate. Now, we'll talk more about the reincarnation when we get to Buddhism. But the idea is that life doesn't begin and end. Just this form. And there's a phrase, what did Obi-Wan Kenobi do? He dropped his body. He didn't die. He dropped his body. And so you could drop this body, but there's no such thing as death any more than there is that the universe would die. However, the successful, good reincarnations come about from conformity to the rules as opposed to your inner spiritual path, which will be the case in Buddhism. So this is our key example, Lingaraja temple. So let's look at it. So here's our grid that we generate from these mandalas. Now you'll notice something. The outline of the building does not line up with the grid. You say, wait a minute, is Lobell pulling our legs here? First of all, this is not speculative. There are texts describing all these processes. There are ashrams in effect to this day where this is taught. It's a living tradition. But you don't put the building at the key intersections because that's where energies are moving. So that's why it doesn't line up. And here we see some of the geometric processes to get to these designs. And this is our phallic tower, and this is our womb cavern. Here it is. Here's our phallus on which sacrifices are made. Usually milk or honey, occasional goat gets sacrificed. Now, don't have to write this one down. I just have one example for our temple. But the reason I want to show you this one is I said one of the other meanings of the Hindu temple, it is this cart or chariot of the Indo-European invaders, which we see here. And here we are at Surya temple in Konarak. And here is the wheels. So this whole temple has wheels, and then out here are horses pulling it. So the temple is a cart as well. So the Hindu temple, it's a 3D mandala, which is a model of the cosmos, a model of the mind, and a means of putting the mind in accord with the cosmos. It's used for individual worship, not gatherings. individual worship. Also, priests will make offerings there. It's a cart or chariot of the spirit. It's a model of the Hindu caste system, and it harmonizes mind, space, sound, and energy. So, hopefully we've made the case for architecture as the manifestation of a culture in form. So, in a way, you have to make some effort, you can see everything about traditional Hindu culture manifest in the Hindu temple. Now, this culture of India spreads. I mean, there's a whole dynamic going on in Southeast Asia, and it gets to Cambodia or Kampuchea, and under the Emperor Surya Vairam II in the Khmer kingdoms of the 12th century, they built huge temple complexes, and they mix Hindu and Buddhist traditions. And you recall from our midterm quiz, we had an arch, but it was not a Roman true arch, it was a corbel arch. So this culture had corbel arches and corbel vaulting, as we saw before. So there are these huge temple complexes. Angkor Wat is the most famous, another one is Angkor Thom, there's several of them. And they were built, and they had mastered a form of turning the swampland into richly productive rice fields, which made possible these high civilizations. Here we see some of our corbel vaulting, and here is what the explorers initially found. And that is, as was the case of Mesoamerica, where these temple cities were just mounds, totally overgrown by the very aggressive tropical rainforest, where vines reached in, knocked over the stones, generated earth, and just turned them into mounds. Same thing here. So there's a sculpture of a head in here. Here's the mouth. And totally overgrown by these vines. And so this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and UNESCO pays for these things to be restored. So the Khmer kings were regarded as incarnations of deities like Shiva or Vishnu, and their rituals were organized around a sacred lingam, which is symbolized by the central tower, which is also a model for a world mountain, as we heard described for the Mesoamerican civilizations. And they see themselves as the center of the universe. And the founding myth for this is a story of the world was chaos. That's how they all begin. And the gods, who are the Aryans, and the demons, who are the Dravidians, team up, and they're going to bring order into this. And so they actually use Vishnu as their churning stick, and they have a huge serpent, and it's like churning butter, where you go back and forth on this, you take cream, and if you have an old-fashioned butter churner, you go back and forth, and it churns the cream to become butter. They pull back and forth on the serpent, and eventually render chaos into order. And so the sites are covered with sculptures. Here's the serpent, here are the lined up gods, here are the lined up deities, here they are. So there are depictions of this throughout the site. And fantastic plans, as we architects get off on the rich geometries of the plans of these kinds of things. Okay, Buddhism. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll do China and Japan. Okay, so what is Buddhism? The law of the awakened one. So sometimes we call it a religion. You can argue about that. We had a very prominent Islamic student some years ago from a royal family, and upon graduation, his mother came, and Brent Porter, whom you just heard this morning, and my late wife and I had sort of helped this kid get through school. He's kind of a party animal. And so we got him graduated, and so the mother was having dinner with us and asked about mine and my wife's religion. So just to make it interesting, we say we were Buddhists. And she said, "You cannot be Buddhist. Buddhism is not a religion. Buddhism is a philosophy. Christianity, Judaism, Islam is a religion. You have to have a religion." So in a way, we can say that Buddhism is a religion. In a way, we can say it's a psychology. In a way, we can say it's a philosophy. It's a huge idea, so it's not any one thing. So it is originated by the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, in the mid-6th century. And it's important to note that Buddha is not a god. So Jesus Christ is true man and true God. Buddha is a human being who figured it out and then is teaching it to others. But we all have the potential to become Buddhists. Spread throughout India in the 500 years after his death, and then later throughout Asia. So here's the initial spread of Buddhism, and then through much of Asia. Then Buddhism pretty much disappears in India, but a lot of the ideas are absorbed into later Hinduism. And now Buddhism is spread throughout the world, although in a small way. There are 3 major traditions in Buddhism. Theravada is monastic. So when you see a travel log about Thailand or Cambodia or Vietnam, the monks wear saffron robes, and it's the monks who have the time to do the meditation to achieve better incarnations. So the goal of the game is nirvana. And nirvana is death. Well, there are a lot of definitions again, but death without reincarnation. Getting out of this cycle of rebirth. And it takes thousands of incarnations to do this in Theravada, and you just don't have time for that. So if you're a good citizen, you'll donate money to a monastery, you'll donate to a monk, but they're the ones, and you hope in a future incarnation you'll have a chance to work on this. So it's monastic. Then there's Mahayana. 2 ideas in Mahayana. One is you can do this in everyday life. We see that idea in Zen where washing the dishes can be your meditation. Your everyday life activities can be, if done mindfully, can be part of your meditation. And it introduces the notion of a bodhisattva, which is sort of a saint. It's somebody who says, I can escape now. I've achieved what I need to achieve, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stay here and not achieve enlightenment until all other sentient beings have achieved enlightenment, and I'm going to help them. So it's kind of like a saint. And it gets weird because a Japanese warrior can be a Zen Buddhist. Now, Buddhism is supposed to be pacifist. You're supposed to be vegetarian, and you're supposed to not harm any other living creature, but a Zen samurai, a samurai can be a Zen adherent. And so we get interesting tensions and dynamics. And then one particular form of Mahayana is Vajrayana, which is the dominant Buddhism traditionally in Tibet. And in Vajrayana, you can achieve enlightenment in one lifetime, but you have to use very high-powered techniques. So that's Tibetan Buddhism. And Buddhism can be anywhere from just a family tradition. There's maybe a little Buddhist sculpture on an altar or on a mantelpiece, to heavy-duty philosophy. So the most sophisticated Buddhist philosophy is superior to anything in the West. So if you say, well, Freud, oh, that's over here in our system. Oh, well, Immanuel Kant, well, that's over here in our system. Well, postmodernism, well, that's over here in our system. They've got the whole thing. So Buddhism can be anywhere from, just I hope for good luck in the job interview tomorrow, to extremely elaborate theologies. To orient ourselves, There are two kinds of religion. There's ethnic religions and world religions. So an ethnic religion is for a particular people. You are born Shinto by being born Japanese. You are born Hindu by being born Indian. You don't, except for some weirdos, you don't convert to Hinduism, except for the Hare Krishna people. So Judaism, Hinduism, and Shintoism are ethnic religions. The only people who convert are typically people who marry somebody in the tradition. Then there are world religions. A world religion originated in one place, but it's for everybody. Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam are world religions. Now let's see how we'll relate Hinduism and Buddhism. In a way, and I hope I'm not offending any Jews or Christians, but in a way, we can say that Christianity grows out of Judaism. And it separates Judaism from its ethnicity, making it available to all people. You don't have to be born, you're not born a Christian, you become a Christian. And Christianity is rooted in one's inner spiritual experience rather than the law or the book. In a similar way, we can see that as a relationship between Buddhism and Hinduism. Buddhism takes some of the more ephemeral ideas of Buddhism and universalizes them and drops the ethnicity. Buddhism separates from Hindu ethnicity, makes it available to all, and it's rooted in one's inner spiritual experience rather than following the law or the book. So, while there are many forms of Hinduism and Buddhism, we can generalize that Buddhism keeps Hindu ideas of reincarnation and the integral role of human consciousness in the cosmos, but Buddhism is for everybody. Buddhism sees the gods not as real, but as representatives of abstract principles, and even Buddha is not a god. And Hinduism has priests, and Buddhism has monks. So a priest is someone who officiates over ceremony that's going to benefit the community, and a monk is working on their own spiritual attainment. Now, I'm not going to go through this slide, but you might enjoy it when you do the download. Comparing Buddhism, Christianity, and materialism in terms of their notions of the cosmos, time, the soul, and God. So, our summary takeaway, 1 minute Buddhism. Buddhism is taught typically through stories, just like the story of the birth of Christ. And so Buddha was a prince who his father was told by a seer that his son would be a great ruler either in this world or the next world. And the father said, uh-oh. In Hinduism, you retire to the forest at the age of 40 and your son takes over. And if you don't have a son, you're stuck. You can't retire and go to the forest and meditate. So he didn't want his son to be a ruler in the next one. He didn't want him to be a religious figure. So he surrounded him with earthly pleasures and didn't let him out of the palace so he wouldn't know about the real world. And the gods conspire to inform Siddhartha of sickness, old age, and death. And he says, what's that? And he's informed, well, that happens to all of us. He says, well, that's no good. We got to fix that. So he escapes the palace, goes through years of meditation, and sitting under the Bodhi tree of wisdom, becomes enlightened. The teachings begin with what's called the Four Noble Truths. So, all life is suffering, and death is not a solution because you're just going to reincarnate. Suffering is caused by desire, fear, and ignorance. So, if there's this cake, I want a big piece of cake. So I have this desire, I can't have the cake. Well, I can have the cake. Okay, now I eat the cake. I don't feel so good. And then I want more cake. So there's no way out of this. The way out is you can end suffering by extinguishing desire, fear, and ignorance, and therefore suffering. So those are the Four Noble Truths. And meditation, or watching one's mind, is one part of that process. So that's your 1-minute Buddhism. So our Buddhist architecture. In Buddhism, we see what's called the Stupa. The most famous Stupa is the great Stupa at Sanchi. We'll look at it in a minute. So a Stupa is a reliquary. It's a place where you put a piece of the body of an important figure. Just like Chartres Cathedral we'll be looking at next semester has Mary's robe, they say. And if you go there, its spiritual powers may radiate and help. So it's a reliquary. It's circumambulated, has no interior. You walk around it clockwise. And it illustrates the life and teachings of the Buddha, which we'll see in a minute. It's a 3D mandala again, and it's a means of putting oneself in harmony with the cosmos. It's also a pilgrimage destination, as are the Gothic cathedrals. So you go there and, later in life, you have the time, you'll go to a series of sites, a series of stupas, and each one will enrich you in a different way. So our key stupa is the great stupa at Sanchi. It was commissioned by the Emperor Ashoka in the 3rd century BCE. It's also a world mountain. It's a model of Mount Muru, as was the Mayan pyramids world mountains. So it's sort of half egg-shaped, and you walk around it, and there's no interior. And in Sanchi, it's part of a large religious complex. Now, this stupa begins in India, spreads across Asia, and interacts with indigenous architecture. So in China, it interacts with the watchtower, becomes a pagoda. And here we are in Mongolia, an ice stupa. Here we are in Thailand. This is gold leaf applied to these stupas. So they're in various forms, and they're all over Asia. Symbolically, it represents, and as you interact with it, it helps you negotiate levels of consciousness. So the first level is the world of desire. It's what's making all the trouble. Next is the world of form. Then you escape form to the formless world, and then the void. So it's representative of 4 levels of consciousness. World of desire, world of form, formless world, and void. That's got to be in your notes. Here's our other stupa. This is the most important one, absolutely magnificent. Borobudur, and it's in Java, which is part of Indonesia. 770 to 832 BCE. Pretty big, 400 feet on the side and 100 feet high, so it'd be about a 12-story building equivalent. It's a step pyramid, stairs on 4 sides, and the way you negotiate it is you climb the stairs, you walk all the way around, and you climb the stairs again and walk all the way around. And we'll see why in a sec. On these walls, and let's go back. We can't see it. It's on sort of a hill. We'll see that in a sec. You can see right here, this hill slopes down. So we come up these stairs, we go around, and on these walls are scenes from the life of the Buddha, including his past lives. And then on top are these little stupas, each like a dinner bell, and under each of these is a sculpture of the Buddha. And it's not in great shape because it's made with volcanic rock, which is kind of porous. It's in a volcanic region, and that's what they have. So it retains dirt. Here we can see the hill that it's on. So here's the idea that it's a world mountain. Again, restored by UNESCO. It's a World Heritage Site. Now, interesting point. Remember what I said about the pyramids, that there's that slight dent in the side? Nobody was looking. They just assumed it was flat. Well, we see in this drawing, it's because people have compasses, we see that this is a circle, but it's not. It's slightly flat on the sides. So there's nothing that I have to say that's important about that other than it's just interesting. You know, you can always observe a little more carefully, which somebody finally did and said, oh my God, that's not a circle. Even though these very important books show this as a circle. And here's our levels of the world of desire is actually a layer that's underground on Borobudur, the world of form, formless world, and then the void. So as we go up, these represent these different levels of consciousness. And as we go around, we come up the stairs, we go around. Here are bas-reliefs, sculptural reliefs, of stories of the life of the Buddha. Here is the Buddha's mother going to the place where she's going to give birth to him. And he has a miraculous birth. And in a way, this reminds us of the stained glass windows in the Gothic cathedrals, which tell the stories of the Bible to the illiterate. So most people did not read in either Christian Europe at the time of the Gothic cathedrals or in this Buddhist era. And so these sculptures are informing them of their tradition. And here we're looking at a plan, and we can see right away it's a mandala. I mean, it's exactly a mandala, but in 3 dimensions. So, the Buddhist Stupa. It's a reliquary. It's a pilgrimage destination. You hit them, you know, like, okay, I'm going to take a year off and go to 6 of these or whatever. You circumambulate it. There's no interior, and it illustrates the life and teachings of the Buddha. Its meanings, it's something you meditate on, which is meditation is watching and taming one's mind as one of the means of achieving enlightenment. So, meditation is a Buddhist discipline. A mandala is a tool for meditation, something to help you put your mind in order. A mandala is also a model of the cosmos, a model of the mind, and therefore a means of putting the mind in harmony with the cosmos. So a stupa is a 3-dimensional mandala. 2 sculptures. So on the right is Michelangelo's David. We'll look at him next semester. And in a certain way, we can say it's the most typical Western sculpture. And it's certainly representative of the Renaissance, and it embodies this notion of humanism, that the human being is not just the soul, but also the body. And these Renaissance artists were very strong students of anatomy and a psychology. If we look at David, he's focused on the task of taking on Goliath. So we have these furrowed brows, this sense of concentration. So there's an individual human being in a physical, or with, or of a physical body. Now, this is Prajna Paramita, my favorite Buddhist work of art. It's she's goddess of transcendent wisdom. And let's contrast. Male figure, a female figure. A figure poised for action, a figure in meditative repose. Eyes open and focused on a task in the material world, eyes closed and in a meditative state. So think of these as representative of 2 different traditions of 2 different cultures, and then see how they contrast.